All right, this is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown, and I am wondering, when are you listening to this? Are you listening to this the day that it was released? If so, tomorrow is the 2020 election here in the United States. Maybe you're listening the day after or the day after that. Regardless, I'm coming to you from a few days before it is Halloween night, and I am in Pennsylvania. And I have to say, when I moved to Pennsylvania 3.5 years ago, I knew it was a swing state. But this election, with everything that's going on, the tension and anxiety of the country could not be more palpable. And as I mentioned, it is Halloween night. And I did get back a little while ago from doing some trick-or-treating. First, we went to a party with some of our extended pod families, and we all were in the backyard. And then we did do some trick-or-treating. And as I've mentioned, Halloween and trick-or-treating in my neighborhood is usually a pretty huge production. And it's crowded and a lot of people come. And it was not crowded. It was definitely not even close. I would say maybe even 30%, 40% tops participation and engagement with the holiday compared to other years, which definitely felt a little bit somber. However, that was completely made up for by the interactions with the people who were out. And everybody was being super responsible. People were creative. We all put out tables and had individual baggies of candy already out so people could just take them and be distanced. People created the candy chutes where they threw the candy down the tubes. And, it was actually quite heartwarming. The subtle interactions that I had with my neighbors, the look in the eye when you give them a nod and say thanks, and everyone just really wanting to make a gesture and an effort to show that we're not alone and we can have solidarity in our humanity. So kudos to Easton, Pennsylvania, and the families here in College Hill. And gosh, man, I wonder when you're listening to this and what things look like, what things are going to look like next week. Who knows? In any case, I have a wonderful conversation to share with you today that is, I think, apropos for the moment. Jeff Krasno is here. And Jeff, if you don't know who he is, was the founder of Wanderlust Festivals and is now the host of a Commune podcast and a writer, an incredible writer. And his partner, Skylar, was the founder of Cool Yoga. Maybe you remember she was on the show years ago. And I've been reading his writing and really appreciating the kind of wisdom perspective I feel like he offers. And I was glad to get this chance to talk to him right now because I felt like this is a moment to reflect on where we're at in the yoga world and what we're going to choose to do when we emerge more from the current state of lockdown. And what are the implications and what are the connections to our larger societal mores and even the decision you might be facing tomorrow when you go vote, which I hope everyone, if you're listening to this the day that it's being released, is going to vote tomorrow. In any case, I've always felt like on this show, I talk about the yoga industry, but it's always bigger than the yoga industry because the yoga industry, even if there is an industry anymore, I don't know, the yoga world, I don't know what to call it anymore, but what's happening among people in yoga spheres is often microcosmic reflections of these broader cultural, socioeconomic factors. And Jeff does a wonderful job of weaving through like the interpersonal to the kind of broader implications. And so, again, I was really glad to have this conversation. I think it goes perfectly with the moment, and I'm excited for you to hear it today. Real quick before we do, I want to say something to any of you who are currently managing a space or thinking about reopening a space and are looking at your systems, your studio management systems. Maybe now's a time to consider looking at today's sponsor, KarmaSoft. Longtime listeners have heard me talk about KarmaSoft for years. It is the software that I used when I had a yoga center. I recently talked to Rudy Senecal, the owner of KarmaSoft, and he's been on the show. You can go back and listen to it. He has been developing a whole set of new things to help people in this moment. And it's just a company that is really going to work with you and not make you feel like you're just a credit card number. So if you need to figure out how you're going to register people for classes, or if you're having teachers working out of your space and you need to figure out how to pay them in an efficient way without having to spend a million hours doing admin, then maybe you will do yourself a favor and go check out KarmaSoft. Go to karmasoftonline.com. Also, this episode is brought to you in support by podcast premium subscribers like Nicholas Smith and Kelly Ludlow. Thank you, Nicola and Kelly. We are so grateful to you and to all of our podcast premium subscribers. Maybe you're somebody who listens to this show and you would enjoy listening back through the archives, which is quite a resource at this point. Or maybe you just want to contribute to the sustained health of this show. If so, the best way to do that is to become a podcast premium subscriber. It's to choose your rate, and if you can't afford anything, just email us and we will send you a free account. But becoming a podcast premium subscriber is so very appreciated. Also, I want to mention that we are about to do a whole bunch of discount promotion stuff on my on-demand videos. So if you have been thinking about getting the online workshop, Gentle is the New Advanced, or maybe you were thinking about getting the new Practice Second Edition videos that I released a few months back, if so, you need to be on the email list to get the discount. So if you're not on the email list, then you want to subscribe so that you can get those discount codes. All that's going to be happening the next week or two. So if you want to find out more about becoming a podcast premium subscriber, or you want to subscribe to the email list so that you could get the discounts, go to jbrownyoga.com. Okay, I think that's it, y'all. I think I don't have anything much to say right here. I think we're just going to get to the conversation with Jeff. I will touch base with you on the other side just to say a thing or two, but yeah, let's do it. Let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Jeff Krasno. Hello?
Hello.
Hi, Jeff.
How are you?
Oh, hold on. I'll put my video on, or you don't have to have yours on. Hi.
I'm good either way. However you prefer it. It's your show.
I mean, I tend to not have it on. If you want to keep it on, I'll just turn me off, but
that's okay. We'll turn it off and we can be more, then we can disrobe in the background and not have to worry about it.
No, that's not what I had in mind. But
okay. Well, I was just, giving you an out.
For me, I just feel like there's all this energy of noticing the video of myself.
Yeah,
and so even if someone likes it on, I listen better if it's off for me.
All right. Well, just nice to see you. And then we'll just be off. We'll just be off.
Well, we won't be off. We'll just be.
We'll be visually impaired. That's fine. No.
Voice to voice, like old days when we just had phone calls, right?
Yeah. No. I as someone that does do this myself, I can totally understand. I sometimes feel more liberated when I don't have to be using that particular sense. As and potentially even more focused. So I'm with you.
Okay, good. I'm glad. I leave it up to people. Sometimes these days people like to have the video on, and I'm happy for them to have it on. They feel like they can see who they're talking to better. But for me, I'm feeling the old school, just hearing the sound of your voice.
Okay, well, I'll try to make it compelling enough.
Well, you don't need to. And I really appreciate you giving me your time today in the midst of everything. Thank you for that.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Honored to be on.
Well, it's funny because I think you can relate to this because I know you have a show and you do this also where, like earlier today, I really wasn't having a great day. I wasn't feeling that great. Like physically, I'm fine, but more like on a mental health level, I was just feeling really overwhelmed by everything. And when I feel that way, my primary coping mechanism is kind of to retreat and shut down, like not have to deal.
Yeah.
And, I had a practice. I taught a class earlier today, and it's fine when I feel that way. I just have I use it, let it be a quieter class. But it's not really ideal for like recording a podcast to feel like you want to retreat. But, I didn't even think for a second about rescheduling because it was you. Like sometimes depending on the guest, I might have.
Yeah, I understand. I almost did that yesterday. I was interviewing a gentleman named Lama Rod Owens. Fascinating guy. Wrote a book recently. He's written a number of books. He's a Black gay Buddhist, which I suppose is unique in its own way. And the night before, I suppose Monday night, I similarly had not gotten a very good sleep and was not feeling on top of my game per se. And to be honest, just hadn't done the proper research that I felt was warranted for an author. And so I was there too, right there with you of like, I should just push this back, and then, I just bared down and I read a book. I read his book on Kindle the next morning and, just pushed myself into the interview. And at the end, I was so happy and glad that I did it because, it's hard to know what to expect, but we had this sort of like very beautiful exchange. So hopefully I can provide that for you.
Well, you would certainly expect some compassion from the Buddhists. And,
Right.
I'm envious because I've been trying to get Lama Rod Owens on my show and I haven't been able to get in touch, but you got him. And he seems like a very interesting person. I'm sure it was a good conversation. Yeah,
he's a very, very sweet man and, with an interesting personal story. I was interested in his exploration of the nature of rage and the utility of it. Coming from a Buddhist perspective, which I thought was interesting, particularly kind of within the context of what he calls radical dharma, which I guess I would describe as the interweaving of kind of personal and social liberation. Very much connected to social justice. So, in the end, I learned something, and that, of course, is my secret, nefarious plot to doing a podcast in the first place.
Isn't it great? You get to study with people in sort of way. You get to have conversations with people that you can learn from. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, he has a lovely assistant, Daniel, so I'd be happy to make that introduction if that's helpful.
Well, you're sweet. But I think it's interesting because when you describe reading his book and diving in, for me, I have been following your writing and your podcasts, and I didn't really have to dive in. I didn't have much doubt because you are quite personal in your writing and you share like your internal processes. And I very much resonate and relate to what you've expressed there. And it gives the feeling like I know you some, even though I don't know you at all. And I just thought, oh, I'll just tell him I'm having a bad day. He'll understand. It'll be fine. Like, I knew it would be okay.
Yes, I'll meet your bad day and, raise you a pair of twos. But it's been an interesting journey. I mean, for everyone, right, over this past year. But certainly, for me, as I started to kind of undertake almost like a public personal development through the medium of writing. And, I suppose when we went into lockdown in March, I had a kind of an interesting quarantine situation because Skylar and I own a retreat center up in Topanga, where I am now, on Neil Young's old ranch up here that we sort of built all these cabins, and we have a dozen cockamamie sustainability projects going on, and to various degrees of success. But from water capture to kind of a side hustle in beehive honey making and composting programs and compostable toilets and all this stuff. So it seemed, since all of the retreats that we generally host up here, of course, were canceled, we quarantined here, and there are a cast of characters that live on the property that are among my best friends, and also very kind of interesting, bespoke humans that are engaged in all sorts of interesting projects. And so we had a little pod up here, if you will, of shelterers in place. And Jake, who's kind of my partner in crime in Commune, the media company, egged me on to, write a weekly column. And, without thinking it through, which is sometimes how I roll, I just kind of foolishly signed on. And, that started, I think, at the end of March, early April, that I published a piece. And, that database is quite large. It's like 1.2 million people or something. So it goes out, and then, of course, I've got myself over a barrel. So every Sunday, I have to publish one of these things. I mean, I don't have to. Of course, it's self-imposed stress. But yeah, it put me through a personal inventory set against the backdrop of a obviously really intense, almost hyperbolically, ridiculously intense period in history. And so, throughout the year, I've been writing about COVID and the movement for Black Lives, and obviously politics and the impending election, but kind of through the lens of my own family and my own kind of personal and spiritual growth. And it's been a sort of trying process, because just to produce 2,000 to 2,500 words every week and conjure the energy and the creativity to want to even do that, and to try to make sense out of it is very challenging. But it's been such a beautiful experience for me, because the way I write is I try to storytell quite a bit, and it is amazing how many people, kind of through storytelling, how many people see their own stories in yours or in others. And so I always attach my personal email, to all of the writings. And so, you
get stuff, you get emails, right?
Yeah, like probably, maybe 700 or 800 every Sunday or Monday. So it's, and I try to respond to as many of them as I can. And, some of them are just like nice strokes of the ego, which, feels good. Sure, I'm human in that regard. But in many cases, there are deep, vulnerable shares of people who are experiencing grief or are at a crossroads in their life in some way. And, I do try to engage with those folks on a pretty profound level. And then I also, just by the nature of what I write and the topics that I address, I get a lot of people that just simply don't agree with me or find something that I've said. It might even just be 2 words out of 2,500.
Yes.
that are offensive in some fashion. And provided that they communicate with me in a way that is respectful and thoughtful, I really have tried to lean in to having conversations with people that don't agree with me or that have a different worldview. And that is sort of a project or an experiment that I'm interested in probing, just because I'm sure, as you see and we all see, there is so much tribalism and extremism in the world, particularly on social media, that there seems to be sort of a disappearance of thoughtful and respectful public discourse that has led to, ridiculous amounts of social polarization and all caps hurling of hate. So, I'm trying to do my own little work in that regard to address that disease.
Well, I've observed you doing that. I'm on the Wanderlust mailing list. I'm in that database, so I got the notice when you started doing stuff. And I definitely thought, oh, that's the guy, because when Skylar was on this show 2.5 years ago, she did mention you. And maybe we should say something about that, because I know who you are, and maybe some of the people listening to this do, but not everyone might. And when I was talking with Skylar, I was asking her about the genesis of Wanderlust yoga festivals. And she mentioned like a retreat that you and her went on, and that you like made some comments about how bad the branding was or something, and that being the moment of the genesis of it all. And I'm wondering, just for everybody, like, do you remember that retreat? Can you corroborate that story? In your mind, when was the genesis of you doing Wanderlust?
Yeah, Skylar and I have been together for 32 years, and I think the secret is I corroborate every story that she tells.
Wise man.
Yeah, well, I'll try to give a relatively concise and condensed version of the history of Wanderlust. I was, I think, as you know, a musician, and then subsequently ran a record label and management company called Velour Music. And we signed all sorts of kind of jazz and progressive hip hop and singer-songwriters, et cetera. It was passion for me. And we had an office down in the financial district of Manhattan, and just 2 blocks north of the World Trade Center. And so we were not in the office that morning because it's the music industry, so we weren't up that early. But our office was right in that tiny little radius around the World Trade Center when 9/11 happened. And in the wake of 9/11, and I suppose the collective grief that it elicited, people did things and birthed things that they might not have otherwise birthed. And one of those things was Kula, Skylar's yoga studio, which opened in early 2002, literally out of the ashes of the World Trade Center, in the office above me, or in the office space above my office. Most of the kind of creatives that had been in my office space left after 9/11 and went into Brooklyn or went upstate New York. So just the proximity of being literally underneath Kula and watching the denizens of Lower Manhattan who were obviously going through a tremendous amount of grief and needed healing. Just to have a front row seat to witness that experience of mostly women, but of that community come up and walk up sort of the cockeyed, rickety, lime green stairwell of Kula. And, of course, like the yoga studios have changed quite a bit since that time, but this was no fancy Equinox studio. That's about as humble and rickety as you could get. But, people got on their mats and they sweated and they opened their hearts and walked out into the little lobby vestibule and sat on this tiny little futon, and, spilled their stories out to each other. And there was a lot of tears and a lot of great joy that came out of that. And I just happened to be fortunate enough to be a fly on that wall a lot of times and see the power of yoga, but even more community, see that power firsthand and its ability and utility to heal and transform people's lives and I guess re-spark their creativity and their verve and vigor for life. So that was really the seed. And then kind of out of Kula, Skylar started leading the retreats to Costa Rica. And, I would bump along in the name of yoga, to San Jose, and then another little puddle jumper to Puerto Jimenez, and then get in the back of a truck and, drive out to the Osa Peninsula. And really mostly witness this community of people that, were getting up with the sun and actively engaged in making like incredibly healthy and beautiful decisions about their life, practicing yoga, meditating, surfing, being in deep community, cooking food together, but then also like having fun and, having a glass of wine or two at night and singing and dancing and like hooking up with strangers and things like that. And I was like, this is really the most inspired life. But like I was coming from a place of the music business. So my lens was like, well, how do I turn this into a festival? All my friends and contemporaries were like starting Bonnaroo and Austin City Limits and, these other really large festivals. And I was backstage at all of those with bands and stuff like that. So I was very connected to that kind of more music community experience. And so, deep in the rainforest of Costa Rica, sort of, posed that question where like, well, if we could move the anchor of this experience, to a place that was more logistically accessible, could you bring 3,000 people instead of 30? And could you, kind of turn it into almost like a pilgrimage for teachers and bring kind of the leading teachers across yoga and thought leaders around sustainability and meditation, mindfulness teachers and naturalists and philosophers and, create a little bit, I suppose, of the Lollapalooza for yoga or for, I guess, mindful living might be a broader and better parentheses for it. And so, that's where the idea germinated. And, it honestly took quite a long time to instantiate it. But what I did have under my belt, kind of in my toolkit, was, a sense for design and look and feel that you mentioned before. That was, at that point in yoga, I guess not prevalent. Obviously there have been a lot of, Ganesha, Sanskriti, iconography and like overly complicated sacred geometry and stuff. And I was like, what if we could just kind of clean this up a bit and present it?
When Skylar was on, we talked about how it was like everybody had these like these images that had been small that had been blown up and were in poor resolution, or like using like papyrus font or something. And you were like, we could make this, we could do way better than this.
Yeah, we could. I mean, I had to, at that juncture, convince people to walk into a Tower Records or a Virgin Megastore, remember those things, and, look at 1 million CDs and pick out the one that I made. So, or that I had released or produced or distributed. And so there was, I brought a certain skill set to that. And then also from just a production perspective, I was not afraid of like building stages on the sides of mountains. And, there was sort of this like notion in my heart brain of like teachers. My parents were both teachers. My wife is a teacher. Could I create a platform upon which the teacher could stand, something like sort of a rock star where they had the production values of Lollapalooza or whatever, but they were a yoga teacher or a meditation teacher, and they had proper sound and proper lights, and there was 1,000 people there, and, that there was a respect for the teacher through the elevation of production values. Now, in retrospect, I'm not sure that was a great idea.
Associating respect with production value, that might not be the best thing.
Oh, yeah, or more actually like exalting the teacher. In retrospect, I mean, there's many, many things I'm proud of, I suppose, and I think there was a lot of good things that came out of Wanderlust, mostly from a community perspective and a relationship perspective. The notion of kind of raising the teacher up to this exalted figure, the intention was quite good and I think noble. Like, I believe that these teachers, and I still do, need to be recognized and remunerated and seen as important cultural icons. And, I think the world needs a spiritual revolution, and, who's going to lead that but these teachers. At the same time, I suppose the other side of that double-edged saber was a certain commodification of yoga that I sort of raise my hand and take responsibility for, that I guess took teachers and commodified them in a way and connected them with brand partnerships and fed this kind of influencer world. And I'm not sure that those things are positive in terms of culture and where culture needs to go. So, I'm reflecting on that some now. But I was young, I didn't know really what I was doing. I had no plan.
Well, I will say from like my kind of indie perspective, like I never hit that like top tier, whatever celebrity A status teacher at the top of the festival bill or whatever. I did smaller independent festivals that copycatted Wanderlust. But I think that what I observed was that when you put those things together, when you put the rock festival, which I went to as a kid, I loved them, and you put that together with like yoga teachers, because prior to that there was just there was the conference circuit, and we would always be at like the hotel in the basement in the windowless room.
Yeah, I hated that.
And they were like really educational, like you would go to an academic conference or something.
Yeah.
And so when it became about, we can be outside, we can smoke a joint, we can be on the beach, we can whatever it was, like it basically was the end of the conference circuit. And it really transformed that kind of like traveling teacher, or like the retreat model, I guess you could say. Now, I will say this to you. At the time, I saw it as like, I don't think this is good at the time. But I will, to the other point that you made, I know people who made like annual meccas to one particular Wanderlust. and saw their friends there every year. And they were deeply meaningful and healing experiences for these friends of mine. So I always I felt so conflicted about it, always, much the way that you're expressing now.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that in a way that when I was kind of in the crosshairs of it, I might have rolled my eyes at that point, and this is, I think, part of my own personal evolution. But yeah, I agree. I think from a community and relationship perspective, God, I mean, I saw relationships formed and long-term romantic rapports and businesses hatched. And I mean, in the same way that people healed coming out of a sweaty Kula Flow class and sitting in that lobby and having that one-on-one conversation, it was always in the spaces that the magic happened at Wanderlust. You'd buy your ticket, you'd sign up for 40 things, and then you'd get there and you'd have a class and you'd see someone that you hadn't seen for a long time, and you'd go off and find a little beautiful spot in nature and you would deeply connect. And that was the best part of it. That was the legacy that I want to remember. As I get older and crustier, I kind of felt in and of its time, we were always like, we want to make yoga a bigger tent by demystifying it. That was sort of like an idea that went through our heads a lot. We're going to make this lifestyle, this movement as big as possible by kind of stripping out the more sanctimonious, mawkish spirituality components of it, and just really make it accessible and open. And that was sort of a trope that recurred over and over in meetings and internal conversations that we had. And I'm not sure if demystifying these practices is actually really a good idea in retrospect. I think in some ways we need to remystify them.
Yeah.
And that could be a whole topic that we could talk about.
I mean, that's absolutely something I've been thinking a lot about myself. I would say, I guess to me, they go hand in hand in a way. That demystifying, which I talked with Skylar about too, that was their vibe over at Kula too. Of let's be really more pragmatic about this or something. That did go a little bit with the scaling, like you were talking about, making everything bigger and going from 30 people to 3,000 or more. That scaling also kind of combined with a certain market influence where that's how you attract more people, or like a handstand workshop is easier to sell a bunch of people to go to than some nuanced inquiry into the nature of your being or whatever.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, right now, when I talk about sort of, I guess, demystifying, I look at the world of meditation right now, and it's very geared around kind of the empirical or the practical, and now it's sort of evidence-based, and it's being leveraged for efficiency in the workplace, and how to get ahead, and how to win the Super Bowl, and how the Navy SEALs are going to be more operationally efficient. Well, is really that the utility of meditation? Or is the utility of meditation about self-transcendence and actually eschewing notions of individualism or the individuated self, and embracing notions of the collective good? And so, in some ways, I mean, I haven't answered this question. I'm not sure there is an answer. I think it's on some level great that more people are doing yoga and more people are meditating. But I'm more interested in kind of scraping past the surface and asking the question, why? What is the intention of your meditation practice or your yoga practice or whatever particular modality that you're doing? Is it really still geared in sort of individual growth? Or is there a component of realizing that the self is illusory and that we are all just kind of modifications of a greater self, and that we are all truly connected and that our liberation is bound. So,
amen. I mean, that's one of the threads I've been observing in what you're writing and talking about on your show that has been really like ding, ding, ding for me. This, for myself personally, this remystifying idea, because I observed that for some time I definitely made choices as a teacher that were intended to try to ingratiate me to a wider audience. Things like, kind of moving away from chanting, or certain things that some people might find to feel too esoteric for them or something, to try to find, in much the same way that you were describing, like a more pragmatic presentation that would be more accessible to like more people. But right now with the pandemic, that's really changed the dynamics drastically. And I don't have, the people coming are people who are coming because they're interested in what I'm doing. It's not about me trying to ingratiate random people I've never met so much before. And what I need most right now, myself personally, is not some pragmatic presentation. Like I need chant, I need like art and poetry and like liminal space. And some of the things that the market was like pushing me away from is now feeling more valuable than it did even before the pandemic.
I mean, it's interesting because I do still have a modicum of a business brain left. And, I have watched sort of like during the pandemic, sort of a transfer of power almost from, Yoga Works or Core Power or even Wanderlust to some degree, to more individual teachers just connecting with their audience directly on Zoom with no middle person or gatekeeper or middleman. And, obviously my heart goes out to a lot of the more mom and pop yoga studios that have struggled. And, to be honest, Kula, the studio that I earlier described, was birthed out of 9/11 and closed for good because of COVID. So those are the kind of strange, twisted bookends of that experience there. So, I want to, the hardest thing in this moment is actually holding the disparity of human experiences that are happening in the world right now. But I am, though, I think that some of this sort of transfer of power has been positive for teachers because it isn't there isn't as much of a reliance on scale, and there is just more of a direct communication between a lot of teachers and their niche audiences. And I think in some ways that can be, very, very healthy. And, if I look kind of from a more meta perspective at like globalism or, corporate globalization or whatever, I think a lot of the answers to some of the problems that have been created by globalism is more localization, more of a return to the local in general. And the ramifications that might have on our the way we see community and trust, and certainly the environment and nature. So we're going through it just to really. I mean, this time is so seismic.
I think you're right. I think I have a partner friend, Josh Citron, who he was a independent music composer and musician, and he kind of saw what happened to independent musicians and Spotify algorithms and like what it kind of did to that industry. And he tipped me off like some years ago and kind of tipped me off on this like 1,000 true fans idea, where you're kind of trying to find like a smaller group of real connections rather than like going for reach or like broad stuff. And I certainly think that you're right, that people switching over to Zoom calls and doing it from their living room has facilitated more people moving in that direction. I have to ask you, I mean, listening to you speak, does that mean like, will there ever be another Wanderlust festival?
I don't know. And to be completely candid, I'm not operationally involved in the day-to-day of Wanderlust anymore.
I see.
And I sort of left the operational role about 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. And I'm still kind of involved on a board director level. At its absolute quote unquote height, if you want to consider it that, Wanderlust had 68 events in 20 countries, drawing an average or a swath of people from 2,000 to 10,000 people per day. It was scaled. And in the year 2020, there are zero. So you can imagine, just from a business perspective, what that's meant. It's meant, so many beautiful, hardworking, good-hearted people that no longer work at the company. And the staff is, to say the staff is skeleton might be even an exaggeration at this juncture. I've also, I built a facility in Los Angeles that was kind of the mecca, the heartbeat of the brain.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.